I'm very honored to be here, very honored to have been part of the celebration last evening, and honored to have received the degree in honoris causa from Netanya University. I have a long-standing relationship with the Jewish community in San Antonio and in cities across the nation and some of the national organizations. To my knowledge, I have no Jewish heritage, but I did take a DNA test this morning. Just in case. It's also an honor to be here with this distinguished panel. This panel will focus on a kind of wrap-up of everything we've heard, of the important messages of the last 2 days. How do we translate those into a kind of practical action? How do we actually create an acercamiento, a coming together of Israel, of the U.S. Jewish community, and Latinos in the United States? To join us on this panel, there are three persons. Lior Hayat is the Consul General of Israel to Florida and Puerto Rico. And our other panelist is Isaac Elian, the Commissioner of Sunny Isles. We are in Sunny Isles. This is our host community. They have a sister city relationship with the Israeli city of Netanya, which is part of the reason why we're in Sunny Isles today. Also with us is Councilman Gabriel Groisman, who is a councilman from Bal Harbor nearby. He is native-born here in this area. In fact, his mother and mother-in-law were here last night, and I believe his mother's in the audience right now. Is that correct? Right over here. Right. I'm sure she's very proud of her son in public service. Let me begin by just saying a very few words myself here of context and introduction, and then we want to go directly to the questions to our panelists. This conference has had many highlight observations. There's a lot of insight, a lot of powerful points that all of you who have participated had drawn from the meetings. Many Latinos who do not know they are Jewish are discovering, because of the work of many of the people who have presented over the course of these 2 days. Some are coming to awareness, and some are coming back to their Judaic faith. That's a positive development. At a minimum, people ought to be able to make choices once they know the full extent of their heritage and background. And if they choose to return to the Judaic faith, then some rights have been wronged, rights as severe as the Inquisition itself, the great pain and loss of identity associated with that historic experience, which we've reviewed here these last several days. And very importantly, as several people said in panels this morning, it deals with the continuance of Judaism in perpetuity as people seek truth about themselves and their sacred identity, and it gives them a place in the Jewish destiny. That's very important. This morning, Consul General Dayan spoke about sort of three elements. He had a framework of three elements that sort of framed the conference very well, I thought. One of them was that issue of Latinos who were pushed away by the Inquisition, and over a span of centuries find their way back within their own life, number one. And the importance of that dynamic. It's been the central theme of this conference, very important. Secondly, he spoke about Israel and Latin America and relationships with the Latin American countries, and he spoke expertly as a person who himself came from Buenos Aires in Argentina. The third element of the framework that he described was the U.S. Jewish community and Israel and U.S. Latinos. I spoke about this last night. U.S. Latinos are now 55 million people in the United States. That's what the census, most recent census estimates tell us. They also tell us that the conservative estimates of the Latino growth in the United States is 100 million people by something like 2045 or something like that, which is only 30 years from now. which is nothing in the span of time. 30 years would be 1985 to now, that 30-year span projected into the future. 100 million people, the fastest growing segment of the American population, already the largest minority in the United States, would be the largest minority by far. The Latinos in the United States today at 55 million are larger than any other Spanish-speaking nations in the world except for Mexico and Spain. 55 million, and when we get to be 100 million, those numbers only become more dramatic. So this is a very, very important force, a massive economic force measured in the tens of billions of dollars of consumer transactions and new companies. The fastest growing segment of small businesses in the United States today are Latina-owned businesses, women Latinas creating businesses as entrepreneurs. So there's a lot that's happening here. It's a diverse community, liberal, conservative, Democratic, Republican, Cuban in Florida, Puerto Rican in New York and Orlando area, Mexican. 70% of the population of those 55 million are of Mexican heritage, most of them legal, but a substantial percentage here in an undocumented capacity as well. Probably about 70% of the total of 12 million undocumented Americans are of Hispanic heritage. So something like 7 or 8 million people. Very, very important dynamic. These are people who have multiple national roots from Mexico, from Puerto Rico, from Cuba, from Central America, from South America, from the Caribbean, and people who have vast array of religious affiliations, a good percentage Catholic, but very rapidly growing evangelical, also Jewish, fewer number Muslim, although the Muslim population in Latin America itself is growing. So this is a diverse population that for most have no ties to Judaism or to Israel. But I have contended over the years that there are so many common interests and commonalities that an alliance, a working alliance, makes sense. Some of it is very profound, related to our devotion to the same religious Judeo-Christian core, and the devout character of Latinos in the United States. In most Latino families are very religious and have a deep kind of devotion, the most devout people in their respective churches. So there's a lot of commonality that's very sacred and profound, but there's also other elements of our relationship that are more transactional. For example, Latinos have a lot to learn from the Jewish tradition in the United States of immigration. Jews were immensely effective migrants to this country over our history. The settlement houses on the east side of New York after Ellis Island that brought people in and created everything from schools and yeshivas to investment banking houses and universities and immense philanthropy, arguably the most successful immigrants ever come to the United States, and a tradition that is respected, so it's continued today, very expert. We would do well to learn from the success that Israel has had in bringing people in from places like Ethiopia, very different culture, and integrating them into Israeli society. Israel may be the best at integrating immigrants of any society in the world. There's things to learn. There's things to learn about education, the Jewish commitment to education, which has been transformative for the country. Not only creating places like Brandeis University, for example, but taking talent and launching it into the stratosphere of accomplishment in every field, in entertainment, in film, in finance, in any field of endeavor. That investment in human capital has paid immense dividends in the Jewish community. The Latino community would be wise to learn from that. And still staying in that transactional vein, as I mentioned last evening, the natural tendency of Latinos to be supportive of Israel can be very important going forward. It's nice to have an alliance with 55 million Americans. It will be nicer to have an alliance with 100 million Americans that is worked at, that's systematic, that's profound. And that's the kind of work that's going on across the country in cities where Latino leaders are joining with Jewish leaders and actually talking in concrete ways about what is the nature of our relationship going forward. We've both struggled. We've both come up from small beginnings. We both had to be the outcasts in the society. How do we together figure out how we learn from each other and how we build together? And in the process, remember the importance of Israel to Jews, but also to all Americans and every person in the world that believes in freedom and democracy. So these are very, very important reasons to want to work together going forward. I'd like to ask our panelists to build on this context and then help us answer two questions in the next hour. The first is, why should Jews and Israel care about the U.S. Latino community? Is this what I've just described a figment of my imagination? Is it some kind of dream? Or is there good reason? Is there ample reason for these kinds of connections, sacred and also transactional? Question number one. Question number two. If we believe that there's good reason to work together, then how do we create those ties? What are the positive, practical measures we can take? What are the practical things we should be doing? Because in public life, when you're talking about massive numbers of people, things don't happen by accident. You either go out and make them happen, and you work at it, and you do the spade work, the groundwork, grind it out, or it doesn't happen. And then we wake up one day and wonder why the U.S. Latino community has some simpatía in some different direction, because we didn't nurture it. We didn't create the ties at the personal level. So those are the two questions that I want to put on the table. And we'll just go down the line, beginning with Gabriel, the council member, and ask each of the panelists to say a word about question number one first. Let's focus on, why should Jews and Israel care about the U.S. Latino community?
So thank you. I think to answer that question, we should step back and understand the need, from a Jewish perspective, of the Jewish community to go out and find friends, to go out and find supporters. The tide of anti-Semitism is rising. It's rising through the bigoted BDS movement, boycott, divest, and sanction movement, which it tries to hide under the rubric of anti-Israel and sort of having a progressive lean, but it really is nothing other than an organized, like Mr. Cisneros just expressed, things don't happen by accident, and the BDS movement isn't happening by accident. It's well organized, it's well funded, and it's infiltrated all communities in the United States, including churches and universities, and all communities, black communities. You see them in the Black Lives Matter movement now, and you see them in Latin communities as well. So the need is certainly there for the Jewish community to go out and reach out to other communities in the United States. And a conference like this really highlights an opportunity for the Jewish community, because whether or not Anousim or Moranos come back to the religion is really a separate point. But what it does highlight is the commonalities of the roots of where we come from. And if you look at the Jewish communities and the Latin communities, you see so many similarities. And if you look at both myself and the Consul General, we're both Latin Jews. In Miami, we have a lot of those. My family's from Argentina. And the reason why Jews have always done well in Latin America is because of those commonalities. So there's absolutely a need for the Jewish community to go out and reach out to the Latin community in the United States for that very reason.
Gabriel, you're the youngest person on this panel, and therefore the closest bridge, the closest link to the much discussed millennial group. that is the largest cohort in the American population. It's larger in numbers than the baby boomers. The millennials were born roughly between 1980 and 2000. It's a 20-year span there. And there's about 80 million people in that group. And they are, many of them, in college campuses where there's pressure. The popular momentum is to be anti-Israel. Talk a little bit about any insight you might have into the importance of millennials and how we relate to them.
Sure, we're absolutely losing
Latino millennials.
We're absolutely losing the battle at this moment with millennials, with college-age students, when it comes to support for Israel and support for the Jewish community, and that's again with the Latin community, with the Black community, and really across the board. And unfortunately, it's even infiltrated the Jewish community. There's nothing more cool now than to be anti-Israel in the universities. I spend a lot of my time speaking at universities and at high schools, trying to help students address the anti-Semitism that they have on campus and how to deal with the issues both substantively, emotionally, and from being proud of your heritage perspective. And the way to do it is there has to be concerted efforts, and it's really just begun. We're a little behind the 8 ball, but now there are some large organizations around the United States, including the WJC, who was here, Stand With Us, other organizations who are hyper-focused on millennials, on college students, and trying to bring them on board. And I think it's very important. I don't think any of those organizations are focused right now on the Latino community. And the Latino community, even though it's diverse, within the millennials, they're very organized and very together. The Latinos are a very tight community, which means it's a community that we can reach. And I really think it needs to be done.
Consul General, same question. Why is it important that Jews in the United States and Israel relate to the U.S. Latino population?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the Netanya Academic College for inviting me to this and to this event and to this panel with all the friends here in the table, and to talk about the future. We can't really talk about the future without looking back in the relations that Israel and the Jewish people had with the Latin American while they were still in Latin America and before the immigration. And I want to create a history lesson here. I just want to point out a few points or a few events. First of all, during the Second World War, one of the only places in the world that accepted Jews escaping from Europe was Latin America. Not all the countries in Latin America, but some of them, and the Jewish communities in Latin America were stronger because of that, or were strong enough to influence the leaders in those countries in order to pressure them to accept or to give visas.
What were some of those countries?
Bolivia was one of them. Paraguay was another. El Salvador, the Dominican Republic, naming a few. We have
Argentina?
Argentina, amazingly not, but many of the people that received visas to Paraguay ended up in the port of Buenos Aires. They received a passing visa through Argentina, and many of them just missed the train and stayed in Buenos Aires, having served in Buenos Aires and having served in Buenos Aires and knowing Paraguay. I understand some of the reasons, but the Jewish communities were strong enough to pressure the leaders a few years later to support the partition plan in 1947, November 1947. And I think that as Israelis, as the state of Israel, we have a huge debt to Latin American countries. 13 out of them voted in favor of the creation of the state of Israel. We couldn't have done it without them, especially the former Brazilian ambassador to the UN, Osvaldo Aranha, that was the chairman of the assembly, and his support for the Jewish efforts to have its own country made him postpone the vote from the 27th of November to the 29th in order for the Jews to collect enough votes in favor of the partition. We have some communities in Latin America now that are in dire straits. We should know that, although that we have a strong community in Argentina that suffered two terrible terror attacks in the 90s, the first one against the Israeli embassy, the second one against the AMIA. We have seen the sad reality of the Jewish community in Venezuela that 15 years ago counted almost 25,000 people, and now in the positive numbers are talking about 7,000 people in the Jewish community that are all under a very disturbing situation of anti-Semitism coming from the government. We have a Jewish community in Chile, it's very small by numbers, between 15 and 17,000 people, facing a huge Palestinian community in Chile that's somewhere between 200,000 to 500,000 Palestinian, and the anti-Semitism there is growing. But the next stop will be in the United States. We have seen the immigration, we've seen the power, the growth of the Latin communities in the US. And why is it so important? The answer is very simple. The alliance between Israel and the US is one of the most important things to the national security of the state of Israel. I'll repeat it because it's very important to understand the meaning of this alliance. It's not only a political alliance, it's not only a military alliance. The alliance is a major aspect to the national security to the state of Israel. Israel is like the small kid in the neighborhood that gets beat around, but it has a stronger uncle, and the stronger the uncle is, the less it gets kicked around the nephew. So we need the US to be strong. We share values, we share points of views that hardly are shared in the world, in the sense that where something happens in the world, no matter where, the point of view of Israel and the point of view of the American society is similar to that action. It can be something in Asia, in Africa, in Europe. We see the players in a similar way. And that's why the importance of the alliance is not only on the political level, but also in the society. But we have to create those contexts that the voter, the one who will decide who will be the next president, who will be the next congressman or senator, will have Israel as part of his consideration. It doesn't have to be the first point on his mind. But he should know that he will never vote for someone that will put the alliance between Israel and the states and the United States in danger.
That's a very profound point that you've made, which is that the Latino community is going to be a major part of the political future of the United States. Okay. And anyone thinking about sustaining support for Israel for the long run has to work to make sure that this new piece of our major politics going forward is pro-Israel. The Latino community in the United States is the youngest population in America.
Exactly.
Our families are larger than the national average, so we're going to be young and growing into political life. And so you make a very good point. Let me just ask you a quick question, because I know you're going to have to leave early. In your work today, as the Consul General in Florida, where there are, of course, many Latinos, not just Cuban, but also Nicaraguan and Brazilian and Mexican in Homestead and Puerto Ricans in the I-5 corridor. What do you encounter at the personal level, at the anecdotal level, as you talk about Israel in those communities? Is there a natural breeding ground for support, or is it a tough sell?
Well, I think I should start by saying I don't think there is a better place of being an Israeli diplomat than serving in Florida, and especially in Miami. I don't think Israel has such a huge support for, there isn't such support for Israel even in Israel itself as we have it here. So I'm looking to find some audience that will create some kind of opposition to our point of view. Until now, and I've been here for 6 months, sometimes I have to follow the lead of so many people that support Israel, and we are trying to be there with them, and unfortunately or fortunately, we don't have to lead them. They lead us into the support. In Israel, is talking about the Jewish community, which is one of the strongest one of the most Zionistic one and dedicated one. The Israeli community that I saw many of the members here yesterday and today, and the Latin community as well. Maybe it's kind of a paradise for the Israeli diplomacy, Florida, and it's different from other places in the United States. Obviously, it's different from my experience in Spain and even in Argentina, where this support wasn't that natural.
Okay.
So I do think we have a connection. The problem that we have, and I'll jump into the second part of the question because I don't know if I'll stay for the rest of the discussion. What kind of message can we take for the Latin community? There are a lot of things that immigrants have on their agenda, political and economical agenda, like education, small businesses. You mentioned a few of them. But I think one of the most important things is to learn what can the Jewish community, or how can the Jewish community help the Latin community? And the most important thing, and I think this is the essence of how come 6 million Jews in the States are so strong in the political, or they have such a strong political voice.
Organized.
And organized. This is the word. And I do think that is part of our tradition, because a Jew, when he comes to another place, he needs the Hevra Kadisha, unfortunately, and he needs to send his kids to school, and he needs kosher food. So creating the organization is a natural thing for the Jewish communities. Wherever they go, they create those institutions. And then those institutions that starts with the basic Jewish life needs turns out to be philanthropic institutions and the political one, and they support the poor, and they also support the community around the Jewish community. And I don't think, I haven't seen it till now, I don't think that's the same necessity that the Latin community had when they moved into the United States, and maybe that's the time to create those institutions that can help the Latin community be as strong as they should be.
Well, and there's also the Jewish tradition of tzedakah, of giving back, a requirement to give back. People are judged on whether they have given back.
Exactly.
And that doesn't exist in the Latino community quite the same way. There's not the same tradition of philanthropy and organizing to help the community. Very important lesson to learn from the Jewish community. Well, stay with us as long as you can. I will come back to you if you're sitting there when I look back. But let me go to David Altman. Professor Altman is the vice president of Netanya. As I mentioned earlier, from the very, very first, he has been supportive of this conference and supported Professor Gross, who heads the institute. David is, when I think of David, I think of the kinds of men and women who were around when Israel was formed. He's just solid to the core, and the kind of person on whom you build a nation.
Thank you.
I would love to tell you something very important.
Get closer to the mic, if you would.
Yes. To have a question from a leader of a community one of the greatest leaders of America, asking us about our relationship with his community is not just something that I can answer by giving small answers. It is a very deep, serious question, and I want to refer to it. And first of all, I want you to know that the question was raised in the early days of the Bible. Our father Abraham got a change in his name. His name was Abram. And an H was added to his name, Abraham, and the Almighty told him, "You will be the father of many nations." And he meant you. What does it mean? Everyone who will believe in the Almighty God and who will believe in the Abraham and the patriarchs is brother of the Jewish people. And that was told to us, and we know to cherish it and to believe in it. We are not the only children of the Almighty God. We are brothers, and that's the way how we should treat our relationship with your community. Second, why is it so important? Because all your existence is similar to our existence. The people who left Europe and came here didn't go because it was so good in the place that they were. Like the children of Israel who didn't find the place in Egypt and wanted to go away and to establish their home, you went out to reach for a home. And we have so much in similarity as people that are trying to find our destiny. And some of the people are coming from a Jewish origin. Some of them are coming of closeness as neighbors who felt they are leaving, we should leave also. Believe you me, when the Jews are leaving, it's time to leave the place. And some of them left the place. And therefore they came here to build a new society. And look what we achieved. We, the Jewish people, in many, many aspects, help humanity in a lot of Nobel Prize and inventions and technology and water and space, everything. And you people quietly, cleverly are filling the earth with yourself and building the new America, which won't look like it looked before, because you are becoming the majority. So the collaboration with the two people, the people who are bringing a lot of respect, the people who are bringing a belief, the people who are believing a lot of enthusiasm to build, we can share and we can do together. And I want to refer to my president, Professor Tzvi Arad, who sits here. After the first connections that we had with your people in Israel, in San Antonio, we wanted to collaborate. And the first mission who came from San Antonio were people who wanted to have his system, how to educate people, children in mathematics. Because Professor Arad is responsible for having a special program how to teach children in high school to become university graduates when they finish high school in mathematics. And this is the brain of the state of Israel. And the people who came to visit us in San Antonio said, give us some of the secrets. And we said, we will share it with you because we are brothers. So they came and they wanted to know, and they adopted some of the systems, and they came to the conclusion that those are very important systems. They wanted to know, what do we do to help students? So we told them that we are having a system of adopt a student, tutoring students, youngsters who are learning in elementary school should be tutored by students. They said it's a beautiful idea. So people came from the Hispanic community to study what is the system. We should share what we have, and we should build together the new society. Built on equal contribution to the society, everyone in his field. Because we believe that America is going to look different, we have to see to it that the new family will be a united family. We are here to stay. You are here to stay. So this marriage has to last for very, very many years. And we can do it cleverly. It's important for you. It's important for us. It's not that we are waiting for you to give us. It's not that you are waiting for us to give you. It is to do what we are doing in every marriage life, contributing to build the strongest house possible. And that's what we are going to do.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Isaac Elian of Sunny Isle.
I believe a very important cause and mission. I'm drawn to, when you're born a Jew, you are reminded that you're Jewish. Many times in the other religions, you don't have to be reminded because the Jews have always been a minority throughout history. And we've always been persecuted throughout history, from the bondage through the Inquisition, through the Holocaust, and now BDS, as was eloquently presented by Pastor Hager yesterday, and noted that they're making their best to fight and, at the academia level, to counter this avalanche of social media anti-Semitism that is being experienced now. To that end, what really, I also ask myself the question as to how the raison d'etre, meaning how was the need for the university or the institute to be born. And, thanks very much to the professors that we have here with us who have touched upon the importance of the mission statement and the aim of such an institute to continue the study and to be able to bring those people together. The importance on the numbers in our day and age, it used to be, I was born in East Africa, in the Sudan, in Khartoum, from colonialist parents. Incidentally, my father is Sephardic and my mother is Ashkenazi. When I immigrated to Israel in 1971, the agent who received me says, "What are you?" I says, "My father is so, my mother is so." He shook my hand, he says, "We need more people like you in Israel." Because at the time, there was this friction within Israel between Ashkenazis. Maybe to this day there is some sort of culture. Which brings me to the point of cultural diversity. And as a consequence of cultural diversity, it brings me to what we're here now experiencing with this effort of bringing the Latino side of society together. And we're incorporating Judaism with Catholicism, with Christianity, to be one of the venues to bring the numbers that Mr. Cisneros has voiced, potentially at 55 million. And there is no question in my mind, before that number reaches 100 million, that we will have a president in the United States who is from Hispanic heritage, no question in my mind. With that, I think that what's important, and I want to concentrate more on the practical measures, which is the second part of Mr. Cisneros.
Just a little bit away because it's popping.
Yeah, it's a little bit too well. I was in a choir when I was a little kid, so I always had a high-pitched voice, but that's... So the practical way is, when you ask people in a local city community, how are they most affected, it is by local government, not by state or federal. Because it's the local people that really do make a difference in people's lives, whether cultural participation, programs and so forth. And I think while we have heard the panels speaking from a religious perspective, or the panel today speaking from a global importance of numbers perspective, I think that in practical matters, a weight should be given to the importance of how to bring the Hispanic cultural society within cities together. If programs or efforts are going to be made, yeah, you may have conferences here, there, to be able to have outreaches and so on, but I think a emphasis should be put within communities to emphasize and to basically, in practical matters, bring this effort forward. And I think in such a way, create chapters in different locations, and then, like other organizations who have been successful, to grow this movement, which hopefully will translate into the fruition of our mission statement.
Thank you very much. That's very, very helpful. All right, let's make a pass here through this panel on the second question. I think we've established in the first round of answers why this is important. Why is it important that Israel and the U.S. Jewish community relate to the much larger American Latino community, many of which are not Jewish and have no necessary connection of the kind we've been discussing today, but nevertheless are growing to that level of population and political significance in the country, and have a natural affinity, a natural respect, a natural affection for Israel and for the Jewish faith. I will say that in my own case, most of the people who were supportive of my family and me in our early efforts in business, in providing support, in being helpful, in being encouraging, in creating organizations, were Jewish in my hometown of San Antonio. And that's true. I could go to Latino political leaders all across America, in Los Angeles, and ask them, who helped you when you started out? Who was with you when you started out? And they would say, a man like Eli Broad in Los Angeles, for example. In my case, it was a man named Bill Sinkin, but Jewish. Because of the point you made about Jews have always been the minority, they understand what it is to be a minority. They understand the special circumstances of fighting your way up as a minority, and there's a natural affinity. What more natural emotional connection is there than that kind of connection? So that we've established the naturalness of the relationship. Now let's talk about how we build on it. What are the things that should be done to make sure that the U.S. Latino population is pro-Israel, sympathetic to Israel's needs, attentive, willing to stand up to the peer pressure and stand for Israel? How do we make sure that the U.S. Latino community works together closely, begins to understand U.S. Jewish leaders, open to the relationship, to the arguments that'll be made? How do we build this bond so that it works for the long run? As I said earlier, this will not happen by itself. It will not happen because we occasionally meet in social settings and have, a reception. It will happen when we work hard at building meaningful ties. Councilman.
So before I answer your question, there's the largest law firm based in Miami is Greenberg Traurig, and Cesar Alvarez, the longtime CEO of the law firm, he's now, I think, the chairman, always tells a story as a young Latino attorney trying to find a job, and he couldn't, no one would hire a Latino, and he went into Mel Greenberg's office, who founded Greenberg Traurig for that same reason as a Jew. And he gave him his first shot, and he became the CEO of Greenberg Traurig. So it's a very similar local story as you had.
Yeah.
I think the answer to your question is really through the churches. I think an organization like Christians United for Israel, and we had Pastor Hagee here last night, is the most important organization in the country, especially when it comes to Jewish communities and the pro-Israel community reaching out beyond its comfort zone. And the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic movement has focused on the churches already. If you look at, there's several large churches like the United Church of Christ who have already boycotted Israel, but you don't have to only look at the churches who have boycotted Israel. You can look at the churches, for example, the UCC, the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, the Episcopal churches. All within their churches, there are BDS groups. And these are organized groups who have infiltrated, it's the right word to use, the church groups to try to influence little by little. If they can't boycott Israel yet, they start with resolutions, and you can research all of this. They start with resolutions condemning Israel, condemning this action, condemning the other action, trying to build support. And it takes 2 or 3 votes or more sometimes. The Methodist Church tried to pass it just a few months ago, and it failed, luckily. But that's the first place where we, as from the Jewish community's perspective, need to focus on. And the second place, and they cross, is in the universities, which we spoke about a little bit earlier. One thing that Latinos have is they're a very close community. And in the universities, a lot of them are organized through La Raza and different organizations like that. And today there are it's safe to say there are no efforts going on at the university level from the Jewish communities in an organized way to reach out to the Latin community. And I think we've highlighted the need for that and the importance of it, and someone needs to take the reins and get that done, because it's not going to happen on its own.
Very good, very good, very good ideas. David?
Yes, why this question is so important, and why on a conference on Anousim bringing such a question? I think it's a wonderful question, because that's exactly what happened in Spain. Why were the people of the Jewish people expelled from Spain? Because they were successful. Because people thought that they are taking the positions and they don't want them to be so important, and they are in danger in the country, and therefore they have to leave or to be killed or to be changed, and then after being changed, to be killed also because they are catching too many places. That's what happened before the Second World War. Jews were successful, were very good in a lot of places, were very powerful. So you have to undermine them. You have to speak against them, to tell what kind of a danger it is. You should remember that when Jews tried to run away from Europe, burning Europe, and trying to come to the United States was closed. The St. Louis came with a boat, a big boat, who wanted to come to America, and the borders were closed. And when the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada was asked, how many Jews are you ready to take from this boat? He said, none is too many. That's what is happening today to you, because you are becoming successful, because you are becoming dangerous to the people, because a lot of the new positions will be taken by you, by all of you, to conquer the new way of life of America. We should learn from what happened. We should build life on love and unity, and of people who are respecting each other. We are the lesson. We paid the price. And you are now in a position that has to learn from what happened to us, that should not happen to you and to us here in this country. This is the conclusion what has to be done. That is the way to protect our future. You have so much in common, such a common interest. Not I want you to help me and I will help you. That's what I said, brothership. Brothership that we will build together to have a different kind of America. And whoever is threatening with boycotts, and with whoever is threatening with a lot of things that they want to do against us, will do it against you in the very near future, and doing it already in the present also. Therefore, the answer to your question is very simple. Be careful, be aware, and hug the Jewish people, and we will hug you, and together we will be a new America?
Well, it comes back to the same question about how the Jews are viewed by the rest of the world, and inclusive within our country. And unfortunately, you know, every Jew that came back historically here from Ellis Island and forward had to change their names, had to do so many things just to try and integrate into society and be able to make it. Yes, historically, the Jews have been the most successful people. It is a well-known vignette that if you want to boycott Israeli products today, you might as well boycott 3/4 of what is being built in high technology and our lifestyle. And that is an issue that, as a result of which, I don't want to use the word jealousness, but there is some sort of propagation that has its roots already in something built through our historical handicap of what has happened to the Jewish people throughout. So it is easy, basically, to step from, first of all, we are a minority in numbers, so it's easy to step on us. And secondly, we are also a voice as Jews that don't have a backup, a respected backup culturally and as an emancipated people, except for Israel, of course, or Jewish state. And that is hard. And the effort, like voiced by Dr. Hagee here, and I agree with the councilman from Bar Harbor that church is an extremely important venue because you can really make a lot of inroads through faith. But I believe that is only a part of it, or maybe even a small part of it. And I believe, like Mr. Cisneros said, a cultural integration. Does it mean that Judaism will be viewed less of an identity as a result of this integration? Maybe. And I also heard yesterday that it's okay that Jews that had converted to Christianity don't come back to becoming Jews, as long as there is this, which is also voiced by Professor Altman, that it's okay as long as you can build this social fabric and the social lifestyle and social effort, common effort, infrastructure, which will improve, the force of this social power of Latino Americans. And to achieve this, I think that Judaism has to take a little of a back step, and more effort should be made to integrate with the Latino culture that is presently in our communities.
Very good. These are very, very good points. We are at 5:15, basically, and I want to begin to wind down. So I would like to just summarize some of the concrete ideas that the panelists have put on the table and that we've talked about as a kind of a work program going forward. The last time we had a meeting like this was in San Antonio, and David committed then to do things with the resources of Netanya, and they actually occurred, as you heard him say. So let me just tick off a number of things here for those of you who might be interested in helping stimulate or mobilize activity. First, Councilman Gabriel talked about the role of the churches, and that's very healthily underway. Not only was Pastor Hagee here, and he is a giant in his reach worldwide. In fact, he's en route as we speak now to Israel for a series of large presentations there over 10 days. Not only is Pastor Hagee involved, but there were some evangelical Latino pastors here today that were very articulate. And that is a huge and important asset that needs to be accelerated, the working relationship with the evangelicals. So the churches, you're right, Gabriel, you're absolutely right, is a critical part of this strategy. Second, you're also right about the universities. It's a very hard setting in universities that lean left, that are they're so politically correct that you can't even talk about things without getting a backlash. And they're fashionable in that the present fashion is to be negative about Israel. So it would take courage for people of that age to stand up for Israel. But it needs to happen. And so some concrete measures to work with the universities, groups of students. And I can't say whether the Latino students would be more or less helpful, but we have to try, because in many ways they are the future. We now have 30 members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, about 35 who are Latino. When these numbers get up to what I've been describing, that's going to be 60 or 70. That's 1/6 of the entire Congress. That matters immensely in future votes related to support for Israel. So my point is, we have to start into the universities in a concerted way. Thirdly, I think we need to continue the city-by-city initiatives that we now have underway. There have been meetings of Jewish leaders and Latino leaders in cities like Los Angeles. I attended one on a boat, very well done, in Houston, in Washington, D.C., in New York, in Miami. So those things need to continue to happen because, as Councilman Elian said, so much is local, so much leadership, opinion molding, influence happens at the local level. Fourthly, I would say one of the most important issues confronting the Latino community today in the United States is getting immigration reform done and working on immigration integration. The Jewish community has a special ability here, a special ability in its history in the United States, a special ability in Israel. We need to find advice and support and expertise that's brought to bear on this question. It's not that all Latinos are immigrants, but most know somebody who is. And the terrible stories of parents being abducted, parents being arrested at their workplace, and there's children at home that never see their parents again because they're on their way to a deportation center, and the children, ages 4 and 5, are by themselves at home. Those are realities. Those are not myths. That's happening in our country. That's unconscionable. And so we need to fix this problem and fix this situation, and I think the Jewish community can help. Similarly, the imperative for education. The Jewish community, in my opinion, totally understands the role of education in creating the most astute human mind that then is translated into success. And the rigor of Jewish education, even the teachings from the Torah of memorization and repetition and in-depth understanding and interpretation, train the mind. We don't have analogous procedures in the U.S. Latino community, particularly people who arrive poor, whose parents have 6th grade educations, who have no ethic of education in the household. They just don't understand it. You know, the mindset is, I want to get my son to work as soon as possible. We don't do education in our family. We go to work after 9th grade or 10th grade. If they drop out, the family needs the money. Short-term thinking, not an understanding of the long-term effects of education. That's an area where we need to work. Netanya has been very thoughtful and helpful, and one area that we need some leadership might be student exchanges. Take Latino students to Israel. Take them to Israel. Let them see Israel with their own eyes. Some might go for a semester and have a semester abroad at a good university like Netanya. Others might go on a 2-week trip and be exposed to things they've never seen before. I would look for our best and brightest, the ones who we know are going to be leaders, the ones who we know are going to be influential, and give them this experience. They'll never be the same. I've never met anyone, including adults, who went to Israel and didn't come back with their eyes glowing. They were touched intellectually, and they were touched emotionally, standing, looking at the Wailing Wall at sunset when it glows almost like rose because of the way the sun hits the stone is just a moving experience. People are touched at the emotional level as well as at the intellectual level with what they see. When people say, Israel has made the desert bloom, and not just with plants, but with technology, with science, with medicine, it speaks to the genius of the people of Israel that is contagious once you see it. You know human beings can do this, then the question is, why can't we do this too? So those things come only through absorption, through seeing with your own eyes. And finally, I would say, and Gloria Garces is here, and she's an expert in media, we need to do a better job of articulating the Israeli and Jewish relationships in the Spanish media of the United States. Univision, Telemundo, Spanish radio, and that's very doable. It's just a matter of, presenting the information and having people who really know how to do that. So those are 7 things that I've mentioned, just listening to the panel and listening over the course of the last days of concrete things that we can do to work together. Let me just close by thanking the panelists. Thank you very much. You were all very constructive and very helpful. And thanking Professor Gross for the work in creating this activity. David and Mr. President, thank you from Netanya University. And let me just say, this is something we need to be doing. As I said at the outset, this panel was designed to take the lessons of the past and somehow translate them into action in the future. We know from what we've learned the last several days that the history of people who were once Jewish and pushed out of Spain was painful. And we know that life has taken many paths for them, crisscrossing the globe. And we have great sympathy for what occurred. But I think the key for us in our time, in this generation, is to take all of that and try to transform it into a future that is stronger and that is better and that helps to save the world. That is the Jewish tradition, and that should be the Jewish and Latino tradition in our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Turn the floor over to David. David, the floor is yours. I think you're the wrap-up.